Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. In this session, we'll dive into recalibrating, why the auto industry isn't saying goodbye to engines, exploring the latest trends, policy shifts, and innovations in engines with insights from leading industry experts. Before we jump in, a few quick housekeeping items. All attendees are in listen-only mode. If you have questions during the session, please submit them via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to address as many as we can during the Q&A segment at the end. This session is being recorded, and the recording, along with the slides, will be available afterward on the Engine Technology Forum's website. And now I'm pleased to get things started by introducing our first speaker, Alan Schaefer, Executive Director of the Engine Technology Forum. Alan?
Thanks very much, Josie. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for taking some time with us this afternoon. I'm delighted to be here today and share some insights with you about the future of combustion engine technology in the automotive sector and a little bit about that recalibration that's going on at this time. The Engine Technology Forum is a not-for-profit trade and professional association. We focus on education and outreach regarding the issues surrounding combustion engines, including fuels and technologies thereof. And today's session is made possible by our members who are represented here on this slide. Thank you to all of them for their continued support. Today's session is going to cover basically three areas. I'll have a little bit of introduction here in a moment, and then we'll hear from our two expert panelists. First of all, Dr. Amaya Joshi from Mobility Notes, and then Alan Baum from Baum and Associates, who will share their perspectives, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. Let me just start things off from a very broad perspective here, and that is, what role do internal combustion engines play in our overall economy? And we're going to be focusing for this session on personal transportation primarily. And you can see all the many sectors that combustion engines are a main part of today. As we think about the energy future, it's one that is represented with the graph on the right, where we have a series of technologies and fuels that are working together to provide us everything we need to move our global economy. One of the hallmarks of internal combustion engines is their capability to use a wide range of fuels and fuel blends, both traditional fossil-based fuels as well as renewable ones. And there are 13 different circles on this slide. The ones in green are ones that are well represented today in the automotive sector. And the ones in blue are ones that are less represented in the automotive sector, but have a big role in other parts of the economy, or will be up and coming in the case of both hydrogen and e-fuels. As we like to think of the current situation, we have a technology here that is a key part of this energy future. It is getting there because it has increased efficiency, greater fuel economy in the case of passenger vehicles, and it has increasingly lower emissions. And so we'll focus today on this technology and also electrification and sort of where it fits in the future. And we'll also say a few words perhaps about the switch to sustainable and renewable biofuels and what role that plays for internal combustion engines. Just to set the stage a little bit, we are in some very unusual times, as everyone on this call can attest. After 4 years of a heavy focus on electrification of the personal transportation sector, there is a bit of a change that's taken place since the beginning of last year. And you really need to look no further than the headlines each day in the media to understand what those changes are. And they focus really on three areas: changes in policy, reactions of the markets to those changes, and then changes in the technology that's reacting to both those changes from policy and markets. And so today we're going to spend a little time looking at those three components. Just to level set everyone on sort of where we are in all this, we look at this survey that Deloitte has done for over 2 decades. This is the one that was done most recently in October and November of last year. This is a global survey of 28,000 consumers in 27 countries, asking questions about what their preference is for engine type in the next vehicle. And here you can get a representation of what those responses were. This is all ages, and then the countries are represented there on the left. But in the US, 61% prefer internal combustion engines. And when you throw in hybrids to that mix, it's 82% of consumers surveyed last fall have a preference for some kind of combustion engine in their vehicle, perhaps with a hybrid component as well. At the Engine Technology Forum, one of the things that we do is to monitor the alternative power vehicle sales, and we do that with the help of one of our speakers coming up, Alan Baum with Baum and Associates, who provides us with unique insights on the quarterly activities in the automotive sector. And this is some of our most recent data at the end of 2025. You get a sense of where the vehicle sales were in the alternative fuel space. And so you can see the hybrids pulling down a 50% share here, battery electric about 21%, plug-in hybrids 5%. And for the purposes of this survey, we look at diesel as an alternative to gasoline, and it's coming in around 24%. But if you step out and look at the bigger picture, roughly 9 out of every 10 light-duty vehicles on the U.S. roads today still run on gasoline, diesel, or propane. Gasoline alone really truly dominates the national fleet. So with that as a backdrop, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, and he is Dr. Amaya Joshi. Amaya is with Mobility Notes. Many of you know him from his work in helping us understand the many changes taking place in public policy and technology and heavy-duty vehicles and decarbonization and emissions. And we're delighted to have him here with us today. He is also the associate editor of the SAE Journal of Engines. And before this, he is the Director of Emerging Technologies and Regulations in Corning's Environmental Services Division. Amaya, thank you for being with us today, and we look forward to your comments.
Great. Thank you so much, Alan. And thanks for the excellent introduction. So I'm going to set the stage for what policy changes are happening today. Obviously, there's a lot happening in North America, but also globally. I'll focus more on North America and the technology implications, and set the stage for Alan to talk about the market implications. So let's talk about the big one in the room right now, the US deregulatory steps that are happening. So here's just an overview, and as you all know, there's a lot that has changed recently. The big one is the CO2 endangerment finding, which has been revoked by this administration. And what that means is that basically EPA will not be setting GHG standards or will be revoking existing GHG standards for all sorts of vehicles, right? And so that's a very big one. Of course, we should expect a lot of litigation and uncertainty on what happens in the coming months. But that is certainly a big change for the industry not to have CO2 standards. Then specifically for light duty, NHTSA has changed the way CAFE standards will be implemented, and they've also changed the actual stringency of the CAFE standards, and I'll talk a little bit about that. The light duty tier 4 is yet to be finalized, but there again, because of the endangerment finding, the GHG standards will likely be gone, but the criteria pollutant part is yet to be finalized, where the NOx tightening and particulate matter is still on the cards. And then coming to California, all of the waivers have been revoked through the Congressional Review Act, and so the Advanced Clean Cars 2, the Heavy Duty Low NOx Omnibus, the Advanced Clean Trucks, which was the electrification mandate for heavy duty, all of that has been suspended, and those standards are no longer in effect. For greenhouse gas phase 3 standards for the federal level, again, those have been eliminated. And then for the low NOx standards for heavy duty trucks, that is currently still as intended, there's some discussions of revised stringency, but at least as of now, that stays with an introduction timeline of 2027, model year 2027. So again, lots of changes. Obviously, the overall impact, I would say, I won't go through the last column, but essentially, as you can imagine, is that there's a lot of headwind to ZEV and sort of new technologies that aim to decarbonize the transport sector from a regulatory standpoint. And that is why there's again sort of a resurgence of conventional internal combustion engines, although as I'll make the argument that hybrids continue to grow, and also there's a market pull for more fuel efficient engines. So one thing obviously is that we are the US feels like an island right now, but we are clearly, OEMs and suppliers are part of a look at the global picture, and that's where they have to come up with their strategies from. And so it's good to take a step back and look at how sort of the various major markets are shaping up as well. And I would argue that we used to have criteria pollutants and ambient air pollution as the main problem. A few years ago, it moved to decarbonization, with climate change becoming a big issue, and those two still are in many parts of the world. But right now, there's a lot of I would say energy security coming to the forefront, and that is shaping a lot of policies across the world. For example, I mean, I'll just go through this super quick. India is looking at enforcing more and more ethanol content in its fuel. South America, Brazil has always been a big proponent of ethanol as well, but Chile is now looking at e-methanol, for example. US, of course, I went through, but Europe is looking to retain its climate leadership and is still pushing for ICE phase out and tougher CO2 standards. China is a technology leader in electrification right now. They're also doing a lot on renewable energy. So again, there's and Japan, has traditionally been a very strong hybrids sort of market and OEM base. So lots of each region is trying to specialize in some aspect and to protect its own transportation sector as well in some ways. Yeah. So again, now very quickly looking at the criteria pollutant regulations for light duty. Very broadly, we have the US Tier 4 coming in, which are looking at reducing NMOC plus NOx by 50% and phasing in a PM standard of 0.5 milligram per mile that will enforce GPFs. And I show that arrow here because there is every likelihood of that being delayed by a year or two. Again, nothing formal yet. But we are already in 26 and this starts in 27, so expect a delay followed by a review or something of that sort. But in the meantime, California isn't sitting idle. They're talking about their next set of regulations. I have a slide on that. They're calling it this drive forward, and it's both for light and heavy duty. Europe has already done with Euro 7, but there's some steps that are remaining on finalization of onboard diagnostics, OBM. They're focusing now on non-exhaust emissions, brakes and tires, and so on, and also on battery state of health and other such topics. China, working on China 7, they're looking at drawing elements from both US and Europe for their next stage. And India was there for 2 weeks a couple of weeks ago. They're working very hard on the BS7 standards. They've also moved to WLTP starting 2027, so that's a big change. And they're also looking at tightening their CAFE norms as well, which I'll talk about next. So again, lots of changes happening across the world, but again, we are sort of converging towards technology neutral regulations that will enforce the best available technology from a after-treatment system perspective, which I show here as in a graphical format. So engines will, there's an aspect that engines are being, there's a deregulation on the CO2 side, but I believe that engines will have to improve because there's these after-treatment systems are getting complex, and we have to make sure that the engines match and still continue to provide good fuel efficiency to address this complexity of regulations coming up from the criteria pollutant side. Now, when it comes to CO2, again, this is just a chart showing that, yeah, deep CO2 reductions are mandated across the major markets. Europe, as you know, recently backtracked from its complete phase out or 100% CO2 reduction by 2035. Now they're giving a 10% margin. So they're saying 90% reduction by 2035, the rest to be met by green hydrogen used in steel and also for e-fuels. But that's already an acknowledgement that that was a very, very tough target to meet. And they're now still reviewing these remaining targets which are coming up. US, clearly, we are seeing the backtracking of the GHG standards. India has imposed the CAFE 3 norms starting 2027. But again, this and last week, there's been a lot of information on the industry pulling back and saying that these are very difficult to meet. Some of them are EV enforcing. So the government is really looking again at whether these CAFE 3 norms should proceed as planned right now. So overall, again, you can see the CO2 standards being pulled back quite a bit across the world. And so, like I said earlier, California is not, sitting idle. Even though their waivers have been revoked, they're already thinking of the next standards. They're waiting for a government change and then coming back with the next standards. So they're keeping those ready. And you can see here, this is a summary of their recent Drive Forward workshop that they had. And you can look at, they're looking at a whole host of things, tightening PM and NOx standards, aligning them with the EPA standards, which are currently pretty tight, but also considering new non-exhaust PM standards, just like what's happening in Europe. So again, looking at brakes and tires and so on, looking at new CO2 standards. They also talk about European style RD and using PEM's moving average window method. So again, they're looking. I mean, this is an interesting sort of convergence with Europe as well in some ways. So that is good to see. And then, of course, they continue to incentivize electrics, but also very interestingly, they talk about new technologies for GHG reduction, including ethanol-fueled vehicles, hydrogen ICE. So I think there's a nod to the industry saying, "Yep, we are going to expand it to beyond ZEVs only." Right. So that's happening with in California. And again, that aligning PHEV fleet utility factor with real world use is something I'll touch upon later, but making sure that plug-in hybrids are certified properly, I think is going to be one of the considerations moving forward. So light duty vehicles in the US are regulated in two ways. One is the CO2 standards by the EPA, but the other is the fuel economy standards set by NHTSA. And NHTSA has also recently revised those standards. So this picture on the right shows what was originally mandated by the previous administration. So you can see the fuel economy in miles per gallon increasing from 22 to 26 significantly. But this administration has come in and said, no, that's too strong, and also more importantly that electric vehicles were included when setting these standards. And so they have now revised it, and you can see those curves collapsing with only a 0.25% increase required per year. Moreover, they've also done some other changes, such as removing the off-cycle technologies from standard setting, saying that those are now fairly standard, and then also removing compliance credits from EVs and plugins, and any penalties for non-compliance. So again, some of this is a setback for EVs because if you remove compliance credits from the market, those are not going to be traded, and so that's an economic setback for some of the EV manufacturers who are selling these credits to others, right? So and moving forward, NHTSA said that standards will be based solely on internal combustion engine vehicle performance. So that's a big change as well. Now I just did a quick analysis of GM as an example fleet. What you're looking at at is the fuel economy on the y-axis, miles per gallon, versus the footprint. So these standards, as you saw in the previous slide, are footprint based, right, for the vehicle. The size of these bubbles is the number of vehicles sold in 2024, and you can see that the blue ones are gasoline, the golden ones are EVs, and greens are diesels. Now, first of all, you can just see directly that obviously EVs have very high fuel economy, but even diesels offer about a 40% improved fuel economy compared to gasoline, which is pretty interesting, very significant improvement in fuel economy. But if you do the analysis, again, I got this data from EPA, and if you do the analysis, the CAFE that was calculated was 27.4 miles per gallon. Now NHTSA says it's 26.2. Obviously, I've not included each and every variant of the vehicle. This is a very large, so this is fairly representative, but it's not absolutely accurate. So I get close to what NHTSA had. But the main point is that the requirement was 25 miles per gallon. So they're already exceeding the requirement. And the point here is that if you want to do like a 0.25% improvement in the next few years, they don't have to do much. In fact, if you even take the EVs out of this picture, it hardly changes their fleet average fuel economy. So all that to say that, OEMs are now fairly comfortable. I think they should be with meeting the current CAFE standards, and very little would be required in terms of changing anything to meet just the fuel economy standards as such. It's all going to be a consumer pull driven story, I think. Looking at the fuel economy in a different way, yes, we have continued to improve the fuel economy for the past several years. I mean, you can see since 2004, there's been a continuous increase in the fuel economy, even without EVs. But clearly, in the recent years, that the much of the increase has been coming because of inclusion of EVs, and by that I include plug-in hybrids as well. But the chart on the right, and this is coming from the EPA's automotive trends report, right? It shows that there's a lot of technologies still that are not yet adopted, right? So even GDI, direct injection, is not 100% across the board. In fact, there are a lot of OEMs who are still, at below 50% adoption. Same thing, you can look at, cylinder deactivation, not even used by many OEMs. Hybridization has not yet made a major, adoption into many OEMs. So the point here being that there is still room for ICE to improve if some of these technologies are yet going to be adopted in the future. The same picture in Europe, you can see now this, I'm showing a CO2 curve. That CO2 has been reducing for many of the years in the past, and they have, OEMs have been able to meet the recent targets, although that's going to get more and more tough as we go to 2030 and obviously 2035. And by the way, this is a slightly older chart, so that 2035 shouldn't be zero, it should really be at 10%. But anyway, you see that it's, much of the recent targets are being met by EV growth, but it's going to get harder unless that EV share continues to grow. Now that's the good news on the right. The problem, however, and this is more recent data coming in, which shows that yes, there's a large gap between lab certified CO2 values and real world data, real world CO2 emissions, and especially this onboard fuel consumption monitoring is giving a lot of data and showing that yes, there's still a pretty big gap, especially when it comes to plug-in hybrids, because A, they are not charged as often, but B, even in the certification step, the charge depleting mode doesn't actually only account for electric only driving mode. There is the engine which comes on. So this is getting a lot of attention. And oops, I see a Word document pop up. Okay, so so this is getting a lot of attention, not only in Europe but also in US and other places. So this is something to watch. Okay, so I'll be quick. So very quickly, the point here is, yes, there's a lot of pullback on the CO2 regs, but engine development still continues because obviously fuel economy is important, especially today. We know fuel prices are very high, and again, like I said, so consumers want better fuel economy, but also taking a global picture, engines have to continue to improve for all markets, right? So quickly going through a couple of examples. This is Honda showing their latest 2-liter engine at the SAE World Congress last year, and this is where they have changed reduced the bore to stroke ratio for lower heat losses, added cooled EGR, gone from port fuel to direct injected, increased the specific power and the peak thermal efficiency, going from 36 to 40%. Yeah, that's a big change. And they worked on an improved injection system so that they actually are now emitting below 1 milligram per mile PM under the conditions they tested, and again improving fuel economy broadly across the engine map. So all across a very, very nice development of a new engine with improved efficiency and emissions. The next, real quick, again, this is here in the US, on the left, Stellantis, showing their 2-liter engine, this Hurricane 4 turbo engine, which has 10% lower fuel consumption and 20% more power. They also have worked on the injection system using both port fuel injected and 350 bar GDI with a certain strategy on when to apply the two. Also using Miller cycle and a compression ratio of 12:1. All of this going towards improved fuel economy. And it's a very high specific power that they have, which I'm showing on the top right. So this was a presentation made by Mercedes-Benz and Geely, and they showed, and I should have had references to these, but I believe this was shown at the Vienna Motor Symposium, the one on the right. But anyway, they showed their engine is a 1.5 liter with a 39.4% brake thermal efficiency, and that they've combined it with a P2 hybrid architecture and made it compliant with Euro 7. But in their presentation, they have this chart showing, where the future potential for specific power could be with against compression ratio, and the Hurricane engine is already way beyond that. So I think it's already showing how quickly some of these engines are advancing. I have to talk real quick about fuels. Just wanted to say that engines are not being developed by themselves alone, but also in conjunction with fuels, right? Which are, as we all know, there's like a whole host of fuels that everyone's talking about. The European revised target for 90%, so the remaining 10% comes from e-fuels partly. So there's going to be a lot of emphasis on that, and also some other sustainable renewable fuels. And there was a life cycle analysis recently done by AECC, which they showed at a conference I was at, and they show that essentially that you can get a significant reduction in CO2 from a well-to-wheel or a cradle-to-grave perspective if you start using some of these bio and renewable fuels or e-fuels, and they can be quite competitive with EVs on a life cycle basis. In fact, for that little thing at the bottom, this horsepower train, and Repsol recently just announced that they have a new efficient hybrid powertrain running on 100% renewable gasoline. So again, this whole drive towards hybrid powertrains and renewable fuels is coming together pretty rapidly. And this is not only in Europe. I just wanted to show that US EPA also put out their increased targets. And I see Alan come on, so that's my warning to speed up. I'll be super quick. Hybrids, strong story, right, in the US. I just want to point out that taking the going on the EPA website and just looking at the fuel economy numbers, you can see today that the hybrids offer about a 12.5 miles per gallon improvement at an average price difference of 1,800. So I think that's a no-brainer, and the consumers are seeing it and getting going for hybrids. This chart in the middle is from ICCT, and they showed that, look, today hybrids can offer anywhere from 30 to 40% reduction in CO2. So that's pretty amazing, and that there's still more reductions to expect if more advanced ICE, technologies are adopted. So I think hybrids are pretty strong, and continuing along that line, extended range EVs are now being introduced. And this little cartoon on the top, I just wanted to make the point that, traditionally we've gone from internal combustion engines to hybrids as a bridge technology and moving towards EVs. Now, very interestingly, because of the range anxiety and then the lack of sales of EVs, OEMs are saying, let's start with an EV and add an engine and make it infinite range, and sort of become an move towards EREVs, right? So again, Horse there showing recently, they are 1.5 liter, very compact. They call it like a briefcase type engine that can be added to any EV to make it an EREV. And the ones on the right are just some recent announcement where Ford, for example, said they are replacing their electric F-150 Lightning with an extended range EV, and some other OEMs also talking about their offerings there. So I think, yes, that's all I had. And then, obviously we're not taking questions now, but later, and then I'll hand it over to Alan for the market update.
Thank you, Alan. This is Alan Schaefer. Just want to introduce Alan Baum from Baum and Associates, and one of the resources we have available on our website is a vehicle sales dashboard here. We regularly update this with information from Alan Baum, and we also have a listing of diesel vehicles available in the U.S. So with that as our intro, Alan, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Alan, and thank you, Amaya. So I'm going to kind of take off from what Amaya was talking about from the technical side, and connect that to market and how the automakers are responding now and in the future. And of course, as Amaya mentioned, much more focus on North America than the rest of the world. So electric vehicle market has actually been, in terms of the share of the total market, pretty stagnant since 2023. And a lot of that was a delay in offering some new vehicles, even as the previous administration, of course, was very supportive. We're going to see a decline, which you will see in a moment, certainly this year and next year, because of the pull forward that occurred because of the incentives expiring, the consumer incentives, that is, last year. Um, as a result, of course, the hybrid market is going to take off. That's limited a little bit, though, because not as many automakers offer hybrids, and for that matter, PHEVs, as perhaps they should, given the demand, and certainly the demand as the BEV demand slides downward. Although it is likely to increase a little bit going forward. I'll talk more about that. The U.S. market is, I'd like to call it, the tail of the PHEV global market now, which is actually not an unusual situation. In the early years of this decade, the EU, for example, had stronger incentives and requirements, even when they did exist here in North America. And as a result, we were kind of getting the leftovers. A lot of the European manufacturers were very strong, particularly in PHEVs, and to the extent that they had a product available, it was sold here. Now, that same thing is still true because the EU is continuing, as Amaya said, to be a stronger regulator. And it's true in China as well. PHEVs are a major portion of their electric market. The slight difference, though, and when we talk about ICE engines here in the US, they're going to be different than they've been in the past, particularly as hybrids increase, which requires a little less oomph, if you will, from the internal combustion engine that's in that vehicle, and that's certainly true with PHEVs and AREVs, which I'll also talk about. And of course, suppliers have to juggle that. And so that becomes a huge issue as they move from being more focused on BEVs. Obviously, very difficult financial, operational, etc. So just briefly, This is the more detailed version of what has been mentioned earlier, the monthly sales reports that I do on BEVs in the aqua and the PHEVs in the greenish tint. Those are numbers both for December and the entire year. And you see that together, BEVs and PHEVs are about 9.5% of sales in 2025. That was down from 2024, 9.9%. So far this year, just 2 months, that share is 5.9%. And of course, we expected a big drop because of the rush, if you will, that occurred to BEV sales and PHEVs for that matter up to September of last year. And you see the same display for hybrid sales. Hybrids have grown dramatically. 2024, 10.1% of sales, up to 12.7 in 2025, and so far this year, 13.8%. What you also see, and I'll talk more about it, notice on the right here a relatively small number of companies offering these vehicles. Some of the companies, were jumping to BEVs as going to be their answer. Others are just laggards in technology in general and haven't been offering these volumes. Now, I'm going to step back for just a moment. Um, a huge issue in the market right now is the vehicles are just so expensive. And you see vehicles selling at 75,000 or above is 11% of sales late last year. And the next one you see the share of buyers with income over 150,000 is 45%, under 75,000 is 30%. This is not an accident. This is exactly what the automakers like, as it is a way to sell high-end vehicles and make a lot of profit. And that's true on the ICE side. It's true in hybrids. It's true in BEVs. The idea here is you can load more content into a vehicle, and a lot of that content is very profitable. And it results, of course, in large payments. 772 being the average in the fourth quarter of 2025. And is that me where the thing's going crazy here? Sorry about that. Not sure what that was about. Okay. Um, and we also have a very large share of payments over $1,000. That's what you see on the right, 17.5% last year of payments over 1,000. And of course, this doesn't include when buyers pay cash. Oftentimes, the higher income buyers are doing that. And of course, they're buying the high-end vehicles, the SUVs and the pickups that are of that amount. Hybrid vehicles, that's the blue line, still growing at a rate of 20% year over year. Obviously, not so much with the PHEVs and the BEVs, but you're still seeing a lot of growth. And again, we'll talk more about that in a moment. So let's look forward. And what I've got here is a slide of, and this doesn't include the ICE vehicles without hybrids. This is just what Alan referred to as the alternative vehicle numbers. And what you'll notice, it'll take a little bit of work. You'll see that the slide in the center there on top is the current slide, and these pink numbers or pink bars are for the hybrids, and they're up dramatically from what they were a year ago, which is the lower slide. Conversely, you'll see the green, the BEVs, are down significantly. And obviously, that is a response to the changes in regulation. In terms of the trends, Tesla not focusing on volume nearly as much, and in fact, declining volume. You see the BEVs increasing towards the end as technology improves, as costs decline, as there's more offerings. But of course, the hybrids increasing at a much greater rate. And we're going to start to see that in PHEVs too, although the volumes are much lower. In terms of share of the market, these are stacked on top of one another. So hybrids going from 12.7 to 21%. And frankly, I think that's an under expectation because we've got a lot of activity among the automakers, frankly, trying to catch up and get their hybrid volumes out there. So these numbers will grow. Whereas there's some growth in BEVs, not in the short term, certainly, but towards the end of the forecast period. Very busy chart. This shows you which automakers are doing what. Again, Tesla's leading the pack. They obviously have nothing to sell except their BEVs. But if you look at this carefully later, you'll see the GM and Ford numbers, for example, coming down significantly. And PHEVs, the actual leader in PHEVs was Stellantis. Earlier this year, they literally dropped out of the market and pulled back the Wrangler 4xe and the Grand Cherokee 4xe. We're going to see some PHEVs and AREVs going forward, but the volumes are much lower than they were. And again, you look at the differences between the two charts and you'll see that. Regular hybrids significantly increased, and you'll notice there are less bars here. Again, not as many companies offering. Nissan, for example, is out of this market. They're desperately trying to get back into it because their Rogue, for example, is not competitive with the RAV4 and the CR-V, both of which are offered in hybrid form in significant numbers. So let's talk about those individual companies. Here is GM. GM actually was fairly committed to BEVs. They have a full line of Cadillacs. They had, and they still do, although the volumes are declining. The Chevy Bolt is back, but in a limited run. That means it's going to be gone in a year. The Equinox EV has actually done quite well. But they're not in the hybrid market. They're not in the PHEV market. They are going to be back in PHEVs with the Silverado and the Sierra next year. They're probably going to be back with hybrids, but again, they're a little slow. At Ford, notice the difference between the two scales in the charts. Their hybrid sales are increasing. On the other hand, their BEV and PHEV sales are down, starting to return when they bring out their what they call their universal EV platform, which is what they're trying to compete with China, they say, with this new technology. We see certain products that are out of the market. The F-150 Lightning, they're actually going to repurpose that name and put it on an AREV, which they're going to launch next year. They've got a range of products. They actually, as you see, do have a significant number of hybrids, including on their F-150, where it's quite popular and quite profitable, I might add. At Stellantis, here's their PHEV numbers literally dropped like a stone with the cancellation of their products that I mentioned earlier. The Hemi is back. It will be selling in significant numbers. You don't see it on the charts here, but certainly worth talking about. The Hurricane, which is their new ICE engine, is available in both 6 and 4 cylinders as inline, not V6, is actually a more efficient and more powerful engine than the Hemi. But hey, you want a Hemi? You got it. And obviously, they're happy to oblige because they're charging big money for it and packaging it with a lot of equipment. The product line has gone through a lot of changes, both with the new leadership at Stellantis and the changes in regulation. At Toyota, again, notice the dramatic difference in the scales between these two charts. They're actually offering a fair number of BEVs this year as new BEVs, but look at the volume on the hybrids. It's really stunning, 10 times the amount. And frankly, at Toyota, it's hard not to get a hybrid. You can't get a Camry in any other form. You can't get a RAV4 without it being hybrid. So the engines, of course, that Toyota is offering with those hybrids are tried and true, as is the hybrid technology, which is now in its fifth generation. They know what they're doing. They know how to do it efficiently and with great profit. And obviously, it's great business for suppliers. Honda obviously made a huge turnaround in the last few weeks, literally pulled the plug on, pun intended, on its BEVs shortly before their launch. They, on the other hand, are moving forward to hybrids, not quite as much as Toyota, but certainly in significant fashion. So to kind of put a bow on all this, fuel economy is still a big deal to consumers, and the automakers recognize that, and they have to figure out how to make their North American offerings compatible with the rest of the world. And obviously, this is different from automaker to automaker because the importance of different geographies vary from one to another. You look at GM, of course, they have basically withdrawn from Europe, and they're still significant in North and South America, and of course China. And so their Chinese offerings are obviously quite distinct from their North American offerings. And of course, the North American offerings are the ones that drive their profits. And so, even as they say, for example, at GM, we want to do PHEVs and we do them elsewhere. For example, you can get a PHEV in South America today. Putting that PHEV into a Silverado and Sierra has been a big issue for them. It's taking them a fair amount of time. And of course, now they have less incentive to do so because of the regulatory changes. And yet, this would be an offering that would, I think, meet consumer demand. And oh, by the way, Ford and Stellantis are both intending to offer similar technology in their large pickups with the Arabs. So Arab PHEV, there's obviously some differences there, but this is not a regulatory issue so much now as it is a competitive one. And I mentioned a couple of times the hybrid and the PHEV issue, where the companies have had turned away from that, and now they're trying to get back. The European manufacturers, on the other hand, the BMWs, the Mercedes, the VWs, just as they were focused on PHEVs and BEVs in Europe, like I said, early in this decade, they continue to have to be that focused to meet Euro 7. They are going to be able to offer those products here as a way to keep the scale up and keep their costs down. So BEVs are going to continue, obviously, in a much lower fashion and in concert with the ICE engine. And as was mentioned earlier, the nature of that ICE engine continues to change. And so being an automaker or a supplier in these situations is obviously difficult, both in terms of focus on segments, which are different from market to market, and in terms of the powertrains. So with that, I think we're more or less online to enter the questions.
Thank you very much, Amaya, and thank you very much, Alan, for that set of insights there. Wow, that's a lot to unpack in the automotive market sector. We do have time for some questions today, so if you have questions, please submit those into the Q&A feature of our system there. Let me just take a look here. What do we have here? We have a question for you, Alan. Do you anticipate that OEMs will notice in time that reduced numbers of new vehicles sold due to cost or canceling out profits per vehicle? Or will we see a lot of fancy new cars languishing on lots and the age of the in-use fleet climbing still farther?
Well, this gets back, I think, to my slide up at the beginning about the cost of vehicles, if I'm understanding the question properly.
Mhm.
That we are simply going to price our way out of large market. We keep hearing people say, "Oh, well, we're going to get back to 17." No, we're not. In fact, we'll be lucky to get to 16 million. Yes, we were there this past year. I don't think we're going to be at 16 million this year, and I thought that before the world went crazy with respect to the Strait of Hormuz and other things. The point is, the North American automakers in particular don't want to sell a lot of vehicles. If they really wanted to sell vehicles in higher volume, they would sell more vehicles, let's say in the 30,000s. They would sell more cars. Try to find a car for $30,000. Yeah, you can still do it on the low end in Nissan and Hyundai, etc. But even those automakers have moved up the chain. Hyundai Kia's average price now is far higher. The Palisade will put you back $50,000 in a heartbeat. You get a lot of vehicle for it, but it's an expensive vehicle now. So, the idea is fewer but better in terms of what the automakers are looking at. We keep talking about, well, people aren't going to need cars because they're going to ride share. And there's some of that, but that's certainly more true in Boston, for example, than in Des Moines. I'm not sure that's the key issue, more so than the price.
Great answer. Lots of issues kind of coming together there. And Alan, you raised one that I wanted to make sure we had a chance to address because it is, I think, one of the issues on everybody's mind today, and that gets into the Strait of Hormuz. And looking at the latest EIA data, the Energy Information Administration, the national average gallon of gasoline now costs $3.72. That's up 66 cents a gallon from a year ago. And diesel is posting at $5.01 a gallon national average today, although I've seen it at five and a quarter here in suburban Maryland. That's up from $1.52 more than the same time a year ago. So with these higher fuel prices, do we think that buyers might shift their choices and start buying EVs? What do we think about that in the overall market? And that's a question for both of you. Alan, why don't you go first on that? Kind of your
Well, the interesting thing is consumers have very short focus, attention span, memories, etc. So the fact that prices have gone up is one thing. The fact that they've gone up so quickly really sharpens the mind, if you will. And so, there might be an interest. Well, first of all, there's a concern about spending money at all in the sense that we've got a real economic concern now with potential spending on a lot of things, and cars being somewhat of a discretionary purchase means that we might not just run to the dealership to buy a car at this point. In terms of going for EVs, uh, you know, there's a lot less on supply simply because the a lot of the inventory was sold before September 30 of last year, and the production of a lot of BEVs has declined since then. What we're starting to see is used BEVs coming to the market in fairly significant numbers. 300,000, 400,000 this year, 600,000 next year, 800,000 the year following. These are lease returns. And what that'll do, of course, is reduce the cost of them because there'll be more of them. On the other hand, if there's a lot more demand, that will undo that. But in terms of a spurt of new EV purchases, I don't see it.
Amaya, what's your take on that situation on fuel pricing and consumer behavior and policy?
Right. I mean, I mean, obviously, whenever there's a gas price increase, it's traditionally been linked with increased interest in electrics and even hybrids. And I was just looking up some data recently to see if how's that happening. I know it's a little too soon, but Edmunds has put out some data where they said that people who log into their website to do research on new vehicles, the research hits that they're seeing for EVs went up from 20% to 23% going from February to March. So that's 3 percentage points that may not. I don't know if it's a lot or not, but clearly in their thing it shows up as an increase, and that obviously they're attributing it to the fuel price increase. So yes, there's bound to be more interest by consumers on EVs, but I think the overall situation is fairly complex. I mean that even today EVs are still priced much higher for one thing. So, I was looking up, I think the average price of an EV today is like 13,000 more than an ICE. And very importantly, at the lowest end, the cheapest EV is priced about 30,000. I'm talking about average prices versus 20,000 for an ICE. Again, cheapest ICE, which is cheapest. So the problem is in this state where inflation hits and everything starts becoming more expensive, are the buyers going to go for something that's more expensive than the alternative? So that's the other thing. And finally, I'll also add that I'm beginning to see more and more states adding some sort of taxes to make up for lost revenue on fuel tax. So, taxes on EVs. So I think the average consumer is going to be cautious in just going for a new variant only because of the gas price. There's going to be an increase of cost, but if this remains sustained for a while, I think that could be a different story altogether.
Mm-hmm. Some good insights there. We have a question in the Q&A. Question might be for you, Amaya. Have you analyzed the proposed CAFE regulation changes, particularly the revised non-passenger automobile, that is truck definitions that will reclassify most SUVs as passenger cars, to predict the impact on vehicle spec and design changes?
Yeah, so I have not analyzed it. I looked at it carefully. I spent a lot of time actually trying to understand how the things change, because there's a lot of detail in there on what a particular vehicle goes from becoming a sort of a work truck to a passenger vehicle. And there's a lot of specifications on what a vehicle has to meet to for it to classify as a work truck or an off-road vehicle. And so I took some time to understand that, and why they're saying that they're reclassifying it and all of that. But I don't have a clear list of which vehicles would be reclassified and what that means in terms of changing standards. What I left, I remember reading through it. What I felt was that it's going to be a more fair description of the overall fleet, so that there are some vehicles which are being classified as off-road just because of certain angles that they have on their thing, etc., but they're being used as passenger vehicles at the end of the day. So they should be conforming to tighter regulations that are in place for passenger cars. So I felt that was overall a good move, but not sure as to how it would actually impact the overall fuel economy for a fleet. So I think that's an excellent question. Need to go deeper into that.
Alan, you have any insight on that?
Well, there was also, I'm not sure if this is the same, what the questioner is referring to. For example, a RAV4, if it was a two-wheel drive, it was considered a car. If it was a four-wheel drive, it was considered a truck. And the kind of the odd result of that was that a RAV4 typically gets a lesser fuel economy than, say, a Civic, or I should say, the Toyota equivalent to Corolla. And so you would be penalized by having the RAV4, which would bring your car numbers down. And of course, consumers see those as trucks. And so if you're now making them truck in the truck standard, then they actually help in the truck standard because they get good gas mileage relative to other trucks. But of course, if the fuel economy requirements are really off the table, it doesn't really matter. This could matter if and when those requirements come back under rule changes. But then, of course, we go to the endangerment finding, and if that endangerment finding is held, is the revoking of it is held up, then it's obviously going to be harder for another administration to bring back some of those fuel requirements.
Excellent question and discussion there. That is a fascinating topic. We have another question here, which is along the same lines. A lot of consumers and reporters are covering these days, and that's how will American OEMs navigate inexpensive Chinese BEVs infiltrating the U.S. market eventually?
I guess I would say not very well, to be candid. The Chinese, well, obviously, as most of you know, there's an agreement now that they're going to come into Canada. They're already into Mexico. They're obviously coming for the American market. That's where the numbers are. That's where the profit is. But the volume coming into Mexico is at the lower end. The volume coming to Canada will be at the higher end. In order to, for profit purposes. And the volumes are still relatively modest. We could see, I think there's a huge amount of demand for lower priced vehicles, and obviously the Chinese would do that, but they're not going to sell their vehicles for anywhere near what they sell them in China because they don't have to. I mean, look what they're doing in the EU. They're selling those vehicles for a lot more money, but the EU sees that and says, sign me up. The U.S. would do the same thing. Obviously, the U.S. automakers are less thrilled about that idea and are looking to the regulatory side to keep those vehicles out.
Mhm. Okay. Well, we're at the top of our hour, and I think that gets us about to the end of our session for today. I want to thank everyone for being with us, and Amaya and Alan, thank you again for your insights. It's a fascinating topic, so many different dimensions to it, rapidly changing almost each day. It seems like there's something in the headlines. For our purpose here, I think we have a vision on this about the future of internal combustion technology, and I think it's pretty clear the policy shift that's taken place has altered that trajectory to electrification. And so that means that internal combustion engines become more important in the interim as we look to see how our transportation needs can be met and still make progress on reducing emissions, criteria pollutants, and also greenhouse gas emissions as well. And that can take place through a variety of means. And I think today's discussion and presentation about hybridization was kind of a key part of that. And the extended range vehicles got some new acronyms we got to get familiar with, but that's also quite interesting as well. And then we didn't spend a lot of time on this, but some really excellent insights about supplying and pricing factors that roll into this as well. We talked a little bit about the price of oil and traditional fuels, but didn't really get into the issues around rare metals and other things that are impacting consumer decisions and ability to buy vehicles. I think from where we sit today, we would say that decarbonization and sustainability continue to influence engine and fuel designs. I think you saw the chart that Amaya had there shows plenty of potential for some of these advanced technologies to be incorporated into engines, and we'll see further downsizing, further efficiencies start to happen as well. And then lastly is that the ability to use a wide array of fuels, and that's whether they be gaseous or liquid, renewable. In fleet vehicles, propane is a growing option. These are all things that give us the idea that the internal combustion engine technology is going to be around for a long time yet, and it's going to continue to improve and change, and it must to survive. So with that, let me again say thank you to all of our participants for being here today. You will be able to get a copy of this webinar, the recorded version, and just follow these instructions here. You'll get an email tomorrow with actually how to get this. But again, Amaya and Alan, thank you so much. And we appreciate your time and insights. And with that, we'll stand adjourned and everyone have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. See you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.